Hey guys, Amar here. We are doing a special episode today with my friend Stephanie Pipkin, who works with me here at ZenMaid. Stephanie was a customer of ZenMaid for the past 6 years and started out with us and to become a close friend and someone I consider to be like almost an advisor at this point that I can come to with different problems and get different perspective on things. And I feel like Stephanie knows me in a very kind of unique way that I thought would be nice to have just a conversation, chat a bit about ZenMaid's history and I don't know, all that stuff and just kind of see where it takes us. So Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here. I just thought of something from our conversation before we recorded of, no matter how much money we make, why are we still being cheap about certain things? Is there a category of items where it doesn't matter how wealthy you get, you're going to always be cheap and not spend a lot of money on?
So that's funny, actually. It's funny that you say that because like I feel like I'm not like that at all. That I'm much more the like if I'm gonna buy it, I'm gonna buy not necessarily like the best, but I feel like I'm usually looking for the best value, right? So value is kind of what I generally like tend to be like thinking about. But what would I not spend money on? I don't even really know. To me, it's like I follow Ramit Sethi, who talks about this a lot. Where to me, anything that I'm not willing to spend money on, I would immediately assume that there's something that I don't understand about why people maybe appreciate that or would be willing to spend way more money on that. So like there are probably some things that like currently I would say more it's like I don't value, but I'm always open in the future where like, in the past I would have said watches. But now it's like I'm beginning to sort of think about getting some nice watches. So like I don't know, I'm getting old enough to never say never.
I literally just got a Facebook ad for like really expensive nail clippers that were like, oh, the technology, we shear the nail. We don't just like chop it off like every
Yeah.
other. I was like, I want this. This is amazing.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
you feel like you've grown that in that area. How do you apply that same concept to ZenMaid when it comes to perceived value in the market? Like how would you label ZenMaid? I mean, you guys want to market yourself as the most affordable scheduling software. That's kind of the verbiage that's been used in the past month or so during the pricing changes. I mean, how do you perceive ZenMaid as a value?
Yeah, I would say it's funny. I haven't actually thought about that, about kind of like the parallels there, but I would definitely say that ZenMaid is the best value software in the market. I would say that there's two, maybe three competitors that I would say arguably have better software than ZenMaid, and they cost considerably more. And there's many software out there that are considerably worse than ZenMaid and costs considerably less. There's also quite a few that are worse than ZenMaid and cost more. And those ones I kind of wonder how they're staying in business. I feel like that's where our marketing is maybe failing us a little bit when I see some of those competitors. But yeah, I would say most valuable is probably the way that I would think about it. I just think that most people are looking for affordable. So that's the word that we tend to use when it comes to the marketing. But I think the more accurate term would be valuable.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who are in using those different softwares, just, side note, I do independent consulting to owners, and a lot of times they're very hung up on one particular feature or really specific thing that
Mhm.
that software does that maybe they're very used to or have built their workflows around, so they can't imagine changing that at all of like this won't work for me if it doesn't do this very specific thing, and maybe that's why they're stuck on it. And or just, I know for myself, imagining switching my entire company to a different scheduling software at this point could, like, I can't even fathom it. It would have to be so good to go through that pain. It's such a sticky software, I feel like, at least when you're bigger.
Yeah, that was something that was quite interesting that I learned relatively early on in the ZenMaid journey. I was talking to one of the industry consultants at the ARCSI, like the cleaning convention, and I was questioning why so many people were using software that they hated. And it was when I was very new and thought that ZenMaid was hot shit. And it was just that youthful ignorance, and came in a bit like a bull in a china shop and was, our software's better. Why doesn't everyone use this? And he said to me, what you find is that most people are using a software that they don't really like because there aren't that many software out there that people actually do like. And he's like, but you're here at a convention talking to the biggest companies. Most of the biggest companies, they haven't picked the software that they're on because it's the best for their size now, it's whatever software they were using when they hit that maybe 15 to 20 cleaner mark. And when you hit that mark with any software, it's just very, very difficult to get off it. And you kind of have to do it before then. And so he's like, most folks like know that there's better software out there, but it's just not worth like kind of like the pain. And so that's why you've seen at the company retreat last year that we were talking about like the ICP, and for those listening, that's ZenMaid's like ideal like customer profile, and how we're looking to lock up those folks in the 8 to 12 cleaner range, but we're realizing that they tend to sign up for us when they're in the 4 to 7 cleaner range. And so we're targeting 4 to 7 to sign up, and then we're trying to help those guys become successful to go from 8 to 12. And then if they stay on us longer than that, then we likely will lock them up for 5-10 years or longer. And that's where ZenMaid wins in the long run, is when we can help businesses on like the sort of timelines that we've helped yours.
No, especially considering the bigger that like a cleaning company gets, the more evident how painful and how fearful we are of the thing breaking on an operational level on a daily basis. Even looking at, like the booking koala like fiasco that just happened, of what happens to our businesses when this core feature does not work. It's literally, I mean, catastrophic. So to the point of, even we had switched payment processor softwares last year, and we got so badly burned. It broke our, workflow and operations that we're like so hesitant to ever try that again. Like, we've loved and we got burned, and now we're afraid to love again, basically. And I think that's where we know how bad it could be to switch. And so I think you're exactly right that you have to catch these people while they're still nimble, and also maybe don't realize how bad it could be if we did, if it fell apart for a day or something like that. That transitionary period is where the fear is. And also I think that one of the differentiating factors of ZenMaid is the focus on education. I mean, in our former conversation, you had mentioned that was, you had kind of just stumbled into this, but now it's kind of a core part of, you guys are like a content creation machine when it comes to educating the industry, and that makes you guys so unique and different. So how has that evolved over time? And I guess, considering who's going to be listening, do you think that every type of software should do that for their industry that they serve?
I think that if you're in it for the long haul, I would say so. That, well, but one thing though to keep in mind is that for us, the content game works very well because we're in such a vertical niche SaaS, that the one person I know who listens to this, Josh from Referral Rock, he's not quite in a vertical SaaS. So for someone like him doing the content game, I know that he actually has an SEO strategy that's working and stuff, but it might be difficult for him to become a recognized sort of expert in a specific field, although as a personal brand, he could totally be recognized as an expert. But ZenMaid is very particularly catered to that sort of thing. So I've thought about it for a long time, that one way of thinking about ZenMaid, and there's multiple ways of thinking about ZenMaid that are all true, and they're useful in different sort of contexts. And so one of the ways that I think about ZenMaid is essentially a media organization, and it's the best media organization specifically for maid services, specifically for the owners of residential home cleaning services. We have likely the best media company in the entire industry. Not everything we do looks like your traditional media company or traditional like media like publication, but we have hundreds of videos, we have hundreds of articles, we have an amazing podcast now with you, we've got this vibrant community, and all of that is around information that is provided by the ZenMaid company, but it's not actually about the ZenMaid product. It's not about the actual ZenMaid software. And so one of the ways that I think about ZenMaid is that it is a media company for maid services that happens to monetize through software, which I think is the best way for us to monetize because it's recurring revenue. The more people we bring in at a top level with like this high level content, the more that we're rewarded like long term for these things. But the really useful thing about that sort of framework is that now if the ZenMaid software were to critically go down the way that our competitor Booking Koala did, like recently, that's not actually the end of the world for us, right? That, like, yes, that would be terrible and painful, and we'd have a ton of work to do to make it up to the clients and to make sure everyone had what they needed and running. But as an actual company, we could transition to selling other products, whether that be Debbie Sardone's like $5,000 course, or whether it's affiliate products for someone else, whether it would be coaching from the many coaches that we have hosted on the Maid Summit that we do each and every time. And so that's one of many frameworks that I find quite like helpful.
Okay, I just cut out for 2 minutes, so I have no
I'm
idea.
aware. I'll give you the too long didn't read, and we can either cut this out later or something. But yeah, I just kept going because I was like, this is a good monologue. But yeah,
Good, yeah.
yeah, so in a nutshell, I just said I think about ZenMaid as a media company for maid services that happens to monetize through software. And that kind of clarifies our mission on the marketing side, kind of what we do there, and how all of our content is to educate people. And then eventually they will sign up for the software. But the really useful framework that I was saying at the end, the useful way of thinking about that is that if the software were to completely disappear overnight, most people in their heads are like, oh, that's the end of the company because it's a software company. To me, it's like, okay, well, we have to find a way to make money with all these other things and all these other assets that we've created. If it's not the software, it's just what is it? And so, just as an entrepreneur, that I think is a useful mental model that gives me confidence in a lot of like different things. But like I said, it's more that it gives me clarity around our marketing and approach there.
Yeah, and kind of sees it like you're framing this as like an evergreen like industry. Like I serve this industry, it doesn't matter how, and I have this kind of captive audience because we've created so much value. And actually, that was one of the biggest fitness podcasts, actually, or fitness, I guess, media companies is called Mind Pump Media, and they put out a ton, like I mean, just so much content. I don't know if you ever heard of them, to the point of when they finally did come out with programs to sell, workout programs and stuff. People were like, yes, how can I pay you money? And honestly, that was
Uh-huh.
kind of how I saw, although, I didn't realize what I was doing when I started posting in the mastermind early on. I
Uh-huh.
started just sharing the things that were working for me or experiences that I was going through and giving, advice based on what was happening to me at that time. And to the point now, I have this captive audience who really trusts me.
Uh-huh.
And now I can sell to them whatever it is that I want to sell them. They trust me. And that's
Yeah.
what you've done, build trust.
Yeah, it's funny because you definitely took a quite similar path to a couple of other folks that became influencers and stuff, and I bet a hefty chunk of money that I saw this coming before you did, right? Because you were just on there sharing, and I was like, she's a good communicator, she's memorable, and then you began to build it up. And so for listeners who don't know, Stephanie actually approached me that she sent me an email at some point, like a year and a half ago or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, and essentially was like, hey, I'm working on these things, but I don't really want to play the social media game. Is there any chance that I can create content for you guys and you can post it to your social media or whatever? And it's funny because I forget if it was Bunty who's sitting right here across the table from me or if it was another friend, but I was telling them that I'm not going to have to be on as much of the content anymore because we have someone else who can record these things. And they were just like, that's amazing. How did you find them? And I was like, oh, well, she just reached out to me. And someone was just like, that doesn't really seem fair. And I was like, yeah, no, like I couldn't have gone out and found this if I wanted to. And instead, Stephanie just reaches out and is just like, I have an idea that might be interesting. And I'm just like, yes, that sounds absolutely brilliant. So yeah, I
I was
think
so
that,
nervous to like send
yeah,
that to you because I was like, how presumptuous of me to think that this would be valuable to you. So
yeah,
in a
it
really
really is
positive.
quite funny. Yeah. No, it really is quite funny. But I think the other thing is, at some point, you and I will go to one of the industry like events here and whatever, or ZenMaid might be hosting our own event in 2026 or 2027, depending on how things pan out. That it's likely high time for ZenMaid to do
Mm-hmm.
an in-person summit and everything, but I can virtually guarantee you that when we do that or when we go to that event, that you're gonna be swarmed. You're probably gonna be recognized for ZenMaid more than I am. So yeah, I've
I get
I've
a lot
had
of
that in the
fan
past.
mail now in
Yeah.
my email because, and I think I was your ICP I am the goal of your ICP, and that's the thing is like why it works so well is you're not your ICP, you know?
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
you kind of have to have somebody who is that person for you because I even think of that, selling the cleaning, selling cleaning services of like I talk like you need to relate to who you're trying to sell to. If you're so other, like it's just hard to relate. So yeah, I really enjoy it. Like marketing and branding is I feel like my very like I love that. It's just so obvious what needs to happen to me. It seems, and I just feel like you guys. I know even just bringing Ryan on, like the marketing has just skyrocketed in the past however long he's been with, but it just seems so clear what needs to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, it's getting quite fun just because ZenMaid finally has like the resources to really just like do things like properly, and our approach to things these days is really to, try to go and to find like the best person for every single position and then worry about like compensation after. But first and foremost, who is going to get us the absolute best results for whatever we're trying to accomplish next? And honestly, that's a really nice just kind of place to be in.
Well, and I think that what you've done is getting people who, I mean, compensation obviously is one thing, but it's more so like the purpose of it all. Like Ryan specifically, like he loves like the mission of ZenMaid just as I do. So it's just like it just feels so natural. And even, looking at Alex, like and all of these kind of key players that you have in ZenMaid, I think they're so passionate about what is being done. Like obviously the money's great. Like we all want to make money, but like we want to do work that matters, I think more so. So I think that that's been going really successfully. One thing I've been wondering about with the price increases and know that you guys have kind of been like chomping at the bit to have this revenue growth so that you can do more and like have some
Mhm.
really big giant growth when it comes to features and things. How do you determine, I'm just curious as like a business owner, how do you determine where to put that money? Like what is how do you prioritize? Like we need more devs, we need more customer service. Like how do you make those decisions of where that money needs to go first?
Just for those of you guys not listening, I just like licked my finger and was testing which ways the winds were blowing. I'm
Yeah.
sitting indoors, right? So it's which way the air conditioner is blowing. But no, I mean I think this is what conversation with you and everything, because I think this were like quote unquote like an actual podcast. It's like I'd be trying to sound smart here, or whatever. And if we're being completely honest, it tends to more be on feel and on intuition more and more recently. So in the past, it generally tended to just be quite clear of this is the bottleneck. And a great thing that I saw from Alex Hormozy this morning that just made it really easy to kind of break this down. If he was just like, if I doubled your business overnight, would that double your business or would that break everything? And if it
Mm.
would double your business, then you have a demand problem. And if it would break your business, then you have a supply problem. And he's just like, make sure you're working on the right thing, right? So that's a really nice way of putting it, but that's essentially how I've thought about it. Either we have a product problem or we have a marketing problem. And it can essentially be simplified down to that. Right now, we have more of a marketing problem than a product problem. But the interesting thing is that with software, because they're so intertwined, it's like you could never quote unquote forget about product. So like right now, I essentially have, let's say with the amount of resources that we have coming up, it's essentially split into thirds. A third is going to sales, a third is going to marketing, and I consider sales and marketing to be two sides of the same coin. So essentially, 2/3 is going to marketing. That's a good way of thinking about it. 2/3 of it is going to marketing, and 1/3 is going to product. And that's just based on kind of what I'm looking at like right now. It's also based on what the teams are telling me. For example, Alex, who is our CTO and chief like product officer for listeners, that he doesn't want to actually bring on many more full-time devs at the moment. He kind of wants to keep the team like pretty much where it's at and make that the core team. But he's going to start looking for more experts to come in and to essentially coach or to lead projects. So, we've mentioned on this recording a couple of times ZenMaid's new pricing. We paid a pretty penny to bring in an outside consultant to first help us to determine and nail the proper pricing to release and the features and all of that stuff. But then we also paid him more money than that to project manage the entire release and to make sure that all the departments were aligned and all of that stuff. And like, we could have managed that internally, but bringing someone outside where it's like that's what he does, and he was still reliant on a bunch of our team members, but he coordinated all the resources. That's really what we're looking to do, and like that's how we're looking to reinvest into the product, at least for the foreseeable future. So we might bring in, let's say, an AI expert who might come in and try to help us to add AI into the product in different ways that might help maid services, right? We might bring in like a database expert to help us clean things up to make sure that what happened to Booking Koala doesn't happen to us, right? Things like that.
That's interesting. So now, like looking back and reflecting, what's kind of your after action report for that, bringing the pricing consultant on? Because obviously, like I was kind of curious how that worked, obviously, because I was in those like meetings. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
how'd you find this guy?
I just posted on Twitter about it because I've got like a decent following. My following on Twitter, it's only about 3,000 people, but it's like 3,000 very specific like SaaS founders. Like I have like a real community on there despite like a relatively like small following. And so I tend to get very good input when I ask for questions like this. So it was him, and I think there were two or three other people. He's actually an easy one to find because he owns a roast my landing page, or sorry, roastmypricingpage.com. And so like if you're a SaaS company, you can go to roastmypricingpage.com. You pay him like $49, I believe, and he'll record a Loom video and just tear like a bunch of holes in your pricing page. And then you can go implement that like yourself. But of course, that's like part of a funnel for him to find consulting clients like us. And so I went to him and was like, hey, you want the full enchilada, right? Everything that you can help us with, we want to do as little of it. We want to make the decisions that you can't make, but we want you to manage essentially everything else. And so that shortcutted a ton of the work.
Yeah, and I mean, from an outside or kind of outside, but somewhat internal perspective, it seems like that went over, meaning the pricing change was a success, like a roaring
Yeah.
success. I would say, obviously, you had
Yeah.
some angry voices, as you always will, as we've talked about. But what kind of pitfalls do you think you avoided by bringing him on? Like, is there anything that you were like particularly nervous about, that like even like the amounts, like was he helping you guys figure that out of like how much?
Yep. Yeah, he helped us with everything, right? And so a big thing with Jules is a big part of his job was asking the right questions and helping us to determine what were the things that we needed to consider. So when he came in, it wasn't that he was determining our pricing, right? We didn't bring him in to solve our problems. We came in for him to ask questions about how the value of ZenMaid is tied into the actual like pricing and stuff. And so like for example, do you know what the truest value metric is for ZenMaid if we were going to charge just based on the actual value like obtained? So it would be per appointment, right? That if you think about it, every single appointment that you add to the calendar, we save you just a little bit more time. So like we could just charge 25 cents per appointment or something like that, and that might work. The problem is that most people don't know how many appointments they actually have on a regular basis. So anyone new looking at our pricing page would immediately be confused, right? It's also not how anyone else prices. So it's fine to have novel pricing, but you don't want to have novel and confusing. If it's novel, it should be simple, right? And so there were a couple of like things there that made us decide on users, right? That people know how many cleaners they have. So they come to the pricing page and they immediately know what the variable is that they need to change this to see what their price is, right? And so that's like how we went about doing it. And so Jules essentially, that was something that we'd known from previous pricing changes, but he came in with questions to challenge us on that. And we talked through the appointments and what might it look like with this, and determining, you know, are we going to continue charging for SMS and all these different things. So really what it is, I feel like there's a very good chance that we could have done a similar release and gotten similar results without Jules, but I think that it would have been, I think first of all, multiple more things along the way would have gone wrong. Nothing that we couldn't have recovered from, but probably just multiple things along the way would have gone wrong. We would have been having to figure everything out and to think of like of all these things versus being led through the process. But the big thing that I think about now as the CEO of ZenMaid is, to me, like I think of it almost as like insurance. Of it's like I could do this myself, or I could pay Jules, let's say, 4 or 5 figures for a couple months work. I genuinely don't know what the price tag was on there, but I can pay, let's say 5 figures, right, for like a couple of months of help. And in exchange for, just to make up a number here, in exchange for 25, I can get I can essentially massively lower the downside risk of this completely missing, of this completely being wrong. My upside, probably exactly the same, but I can lower the downside risk. And so as a former poker player and stuff, I'm always thinking about upside as well as that downside risk. That the downside of getting a pricing update wrong can destroy your brand. It can be wrong to the point that you've got to roll it back and then you don't even end up making like more money. Or you could roll it out, increase prices too much, too many people leave, and then you end up making less money. So to me, paying a 5 figure like sum to simply take the chances of that happening from, let's say, 10% down to 2% is worth every penny to me. Now, granted, that's because we have the luxury of making a considerable chunk of money, but I'm thinking about ZenMaid in 5 and 10 year increments, right? Like I'm thinking about decisions that, I'm thinking about $100,000 to $1 million decisions these days, not things that are like that are less than that. Now, granted, that might be looking many years into the future, but this was the kind of thing. It's like, oh yeah, I could save $25,000 here, but at what potential cost? Right. And that's the big thing that's really changed in terms of just thinking about it, not quite as like an investor, but as a risk allocator. Like, I mean, and just like a resource allocator. But really, a lot of what I do these days is more about risk. And so to me, investing in these experts is the easiest and honestly the cheapest way to lower risk at ZenMaid.
I mean, obviously, like that thought process and kind of like framework for thinking, that's pretty, I would say, high level and also very CEO-esque of you. How recently do you feel that that has developed, or since, former poker player, do you feel like you've always had that? Or are there any, looking back, any decisions or projects that you guys did where you're like, oh my gosh, I should have done what we just did with Jules. I should have brought an outsider in. Is there anything that strikes you as obvious?
Yeah, I mean, lots of things. Like, I mean, in hindsight, when we did the Maid Summit back in 2017, I believe, for the first time, or 2018, that we did the Maid Summit for the first time. For listeners, that's a virtual summit for maid service owners. That's a maidsummit.com. When we did that for the first time, we did that like on our own and figured it out. And I brought in someone that I found local to me in Thailand, and she was acting as a VA and working with me at the coffee shop every day to get this out and stuff. Now, granted, that's what I mean though about you have to play the game with the resources that you have, right? I'm in a position now where I can pay for one-on-one help. I can pay for one-on-one help personally, a personal trainer at the gym, and I can pay for one-on-one help in whatever I need in ZenMaid. Where we were at in the company back in 2017, 2018, I didn't have those resources. So instead, what I did is I paid, I think it was $5,000, or maybe it was split with a couple of, sorry, no, not 5,000. It was like maybe $1,000 or something like that I paid for a course. I believe it was Virtual Summit Mastery, I think. And then me and two of my friends did a mastermind every week where we would watch the lesson and then we would talk about it and talk about our implementation from the past week. And we have an 8 or 12 week little mastermind about that. And that was how we held each other accountable and made sure that we were getting everything done. And I would say that worked out quite well. I mean, obviously that's something that we're still doing. We're doing that again, like this year. We skipped last year, but that is something that's on our schedule every year and stuff. So for that, I wouldn't say I knew at the time that getting a one-on-one expert would have been better, but at the time it was like, I genuinely can't afford this, right? I can't afford to pay that money. It just doesn't work. I have to kind of do it myself. In terms of, so your actual question of like the CEO stuff. So I think that's something that I'm constantly like growing. I feel like there has been a massive change for me since around last year when I left to Thailand and Japan, that I did was it 6 weeks away? I think it was 6 weeks that I did in Asia with our CTO Alex and my wife Fran. And when I came back from that, it was like something just kind of clicked for me. And it was like, I think that for a couple of years there, I'd gone out of startup mode because, we've been doing this for 12 years now, but I enjoy startup mode. And I think that's where we as a team perform at our best, like with that mentality. And I think we'd gone away from that for like a couple of years. And so I came back and brought just a different kind of intensity and urgency to the company then. But yeah, it's a lot of things like over time. I mean, the best resource, and this is one you and I obviously chat about quite a bit, is Layla and Alex Hormozy. Their podcasts and YouTube channels are outstanding. Like a lot of the stuff that I listen to there, a lot of it is like things that I already would do, but never had a framework to communicate about, or like I would kind of know instinctively to do some of the things, and this would kind of explain why. And when there was an exception, why that was an exception and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I feel for me, especially in terms of just thinking as like a resource allocator and just moving around kind of assets that we have within the company, that's something that's developed a lot more recently. The interesting thing though is that like I've known that for a long time, right? There's a really great book called The Outsiders that's like about 8 CEOs that have gotten insane results that a lot of people have never heard of. And their big theme to that is that these guys thought about their businesses as a collection of assets and resources and not necessarily as a company that specifically necessarily like existed to do this. And so they're talking about how like, it changes directions all the time. I read that book 6 or 7 years ago. I had this epiphany and like it kind of all clicked for me maybe 6 months ago. I re-listened to that book and it's a completely different book. Like it's something that I say of, it's the same thing of, no man crosses the same river twice, for the man is different and the river has changed. That's how I feel about reading books. And so like I've read so many CEO books that have told me this for years and years and years, but something clicked like 6 months ago. But if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I'd tell you that 3 months before that or 12 months before that, there was some other breakthrough that I had. And so it's quite interesting that like, you look at me now and I don't even see the same person compared to where I started at 12 years ago, but there's no clear moment that I became this person. It's just every couple of months having some realization of, you're a fucking idiot. And then, acknowledging why and moving on.
It's like working out where you don't see any change on a day-to-day basis. And then you see somebody, you haven't seen in a year and it's like, holy shit, totally different. That's really interesting. I love the concept of like rereading old things, and I feel the same way. I often reference like the girl that started Serene Clean. I'm like, I don't even know who that is, but at the same time, that core is still there.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that I'm curious. I mean, looking back to young Amar starting ZenMaid, like what do you feel are the same, like, I mean, this might be a little like existential of like, who is Amar? But like, what kind of traits do you think that you have had that have like stayed very steadfast of like, this is like who I am. And despite all of this change I've gone through and these evolutions, like these have stayed constant.
That's a great question there. So you said constant there at the end, right? Of what's remained constant. And so constant, consistent, that's probably the number one thing, right? As I was recommending to a couple of friends today 2 books that I read in my late teens that changed my life. And granted, a lot of the books that change your life, it's more about when you read them. It's like if you read them again in your 30s, you're just like, oh, this is basic bullshit or whatever. But the 2 books were The Slight Edge and The Compound Effect. And both of those are about just continuing to do the work and to do the work just a little bit better. So it's the same thing you hear from Jimmy from Mr. Beast. It's the same thing you hear from like Alex Hormozy. They tend to tell them, go do 100 reps of the thing and just try to do it a little bit better on every single one. And I have had that mindset like with ZenMaid since day one, where to me, since day one, I would start out by working for maybe 10 or 15 minutes working on the business rather than in the business doing the sales calls. And at the beginning, that might have been as simple as I sent one sales follow-up email and I saved that as a template. So now I don't have to rewrite that again. And now every single time going forward, I save just a tiny amount of time. And I knew from like day one when I started the company that it got it written on a Post-it note next to my desk in the other room that just says brick by brick. And that is something that I have been just brick by brick since like day one. all that I care about is consistently doing the things that we have done up until now, and just consistently doing those things just a tiny bit better or just a tiny bit more. Something that Alex Hormozy talks about is you can talk about quantity, you can talk about quality, you can talk about speed. And so it's just doing more of what we've done, doing it better, or doing it faster, right? Or doing something new, right? Would be like the last option. And so that's probably like the number one thing. And that right there, the other thing that not just keeps me consistent, but keeps me in a good headspace and confident at all times is that right there is my ultimate like North Star. My ultimate North Star is just, am I doing a little bit better today than I was doing yesterday? And I do not care if there's 1,000 things that I obviously could be doing better. I can get to those things. I can chip away at that. I can stack them up over time, but I know there is no faster way to get me to quit something, whether it's learning a new skill, whether it's building a business, by trying to focus on all the things that I'm not doing that I should. It's just overwhelming. It just doesn't help. So back in the day, that was for 10 minutes a day. And then I was spending the rest of my workday doing the work, right? Actually making the calls or writing the marketing campaigns or doing all these things. And you can see over time that that has just become more and more of the day. So now most of my time is actually spent thinking about the business and maybe being on meetings where like a general I'm directing the team, but I don't really do any deep work anymore. I don't have any code in there, not that I was ever a developer. I'm not doing any of the marketing campaigns, right? I'm still working on ZenMaid every single day, and you see me around like the Slack and in the company and on all these meetings and all that stuff, but I'm no longer working in ZenMaid. That I can literally at this point walk away from ZenMaid for probably 3 or 6 months, and I'll come back and Alex and Ryan will have the company like growing and ahead of where I was with like when I left it. And so that's been a transition like over like time. The other consistent thing that I used to say tongue in cheek but has now become quite real is a personal motto of mine. Yeah, when it comes to kind of like the company or like whatever, is I love getting things done, but I hate doing things, right? And so everything about kind of ZenMaid is cool. I'm doing this thing and I'm always willing to do it myself first, but how do I get this off my plate so that somebody else can do it so I can move on to the next thing? And it's literally just been a series of that for 12 years of just finding something that works for ZenMaid, passing it off to someone else. And there's very few things that I still do myself, that I care about a lot of the brand stuff and everything. So I'm still responding to people who message our company page, for example, that it'd be very easy to do, but I just see so many companies that pass that off to a VA, and it's like, hey, this could be a delightful experience. And instead it's just from some VA who doesn't care about me or whatever. And I like to be on there. You know, sometimes I open up Google Voice, so if people call the ZenMaid number, they get connected to me and they see me on YouTube videos and stuff. So like people are really thrown when they're like, wait, I'm talking to Amar? Like, really? That happens all the time. And it's a lot of fun, you know?
Love that you use the word delight, because I feel like that's where, Jim coming in and, using Jim as the branding expert. And he has such a wonderful brain when it comes to like that concept of how can we introduce delight in a software user's experience. And you kind of just alluding to that, not just in the actual software itself, but in the experience with your company. Like I love that. And I'm such a fan and try to be a, champion of that concept of like, how can we make this experience? Like, for example, I own a cleaning company, right? People think cleaning is cleaning. And like having a quality cleaning is the lowest bar. That's the barrier to entry, that it's not like a lot of people can have, decent cleaning, right? Or good cleaning. So it's like, how do we make that the best? Like not just decent, but the best. But then all of the other things, the entire experience of working with our company is delightful and something they've never experienced before. Even for me, like utilizing ZenMaid is such a key part of that. It is delightful to have consistent communication from your cleaning service, because it's so unusual. It's so unusual to have excellent communication or automate. Like, okay, yesterday I did a consulting call with a guy who is buying a $1 million+ revenue cleaning service in Chicago. And so the deal's already going down. It was a really interesting call. And I was like, well, what software are they using? How are they doing scheduling and stuff? And he's showing me it's not ZenMaid. And in my mind, I'm like, somebody got to 1 million doing this. Like, this is the operations of it. Holy shit. Like, it's like, this is apparently easier than I thought. But one, and I'm like, okay, what about like reminder text? Because he secret shopped them, you know, to see what it
Yeah.
was like before. And he was like, no, I think they're manually sending out reminder texts at 1 million plus in revenue in Chicago, like a big company. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like they're still doing this. Like that's just crazy to me, you know, and there
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
follow-up, there was nothing. So it's just like, this is kind of just tangential, but just the whole concept of like, why don't we just work on making little moments of delight? Like that would be
Mhm.
nice.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, no, ZenMaid made I think we've made now $3 million in the trailing 12 months or whatever. And I used to think that we'd be topping out somewhere around here. And then I hear stories like that. And there are literally thousands of maid service out there, like out there that like they're not even using our competitors and could move over. They're not even using our competitors. We're fighting with, Google Calendar and pen and paper and like manual processes here.
Using
Like,
it, Service Fusion, which I hadn't even heard of before. So I was like, I don't even know who this is. And then I looked
yeah,
him up. Like, yeah.
I've heard of Service Fusion, but they're like one where that just means that they didn't do their research to look for anything maid specific, right? Like nothing wrong with Service Fusion, but it's really not designed for maid services. I'm pretty sure Service Fusion is way bigger than ZenMaid, but it's for electricians and plumbers, right? ZenMaid's big strength is the recurring cleanings, right? It's the recurring cleanings and all the catering specifically to cleaning. And so yeah, there are some other competitors out there that do a decent job of that, but then there's quite a few out there that don't do a decent job at that, and that's okay because that's not what they're competing on, but somehow some people still pay for them and don't realize how crap a software they've picked for their specific business, right? I just want to be clear, I have a ton of respect for Service Fusion and Service Titan and some of those, but if you're running your maid service using one of those, like I'm sorry, like that's not what they want either, right? You're not their ICP, that is not who they develop for or whatever. So
Well, and it's
yeah,
interesting because
it's
she's
interesting.
buying it from, she's retiring. Like I mean, she was a cleaner for like decades. So we're talking like, I think that that's really interesting too, is that now you're getting this generation of people my age opening
Uh-huh.
businesses. Young,
Yes.
you know, I opened when I was young 20s. And so, that's really interesting because I know your ICP is probably in her 30s, and I say her specifically because that's the industry. Like she's in her 30s. And so I guess, I mean, how do you see that evolving over time as the generate? Do you think it'll be a easier sell the younger your ICP gets? Because to me, as like a young person, it was like I was so drawn to ZenMaid where the others just didn't do it for me, even from like a
Mm.
marketing. So do you think like over time, like your biggest competitors, like you think like they're not selling to only cleaning industries, like they're selling to the plumbers and the electricians, which is an older male crowd. So like I feel like that like you guys have such a niche understanding of who you are selling to. And I mean it's such an advantage. Do you think they're gonna get with it? Like, hey, we're selling to women.
So, it's a really great question. Yeah, this is another one. Yeah, this is great. Like why it's great to be having like a conversation like this one, because in the past, I think when I was like, young and hot headed, I'd be like, oh, we're gonna crush them, blah blah blah. Like we're so much better. They're so dumb, right? All these things. And now I realize that's not true at all. It's just we're playing different games, right? And to them, there's no problem with us catering to women and catering to a younger generation, because for them, they're not looking to win most of this market. If they win a small chunk of this market and a small chunk of lots of other markets, they can have a completely healthy winning business, and so can we. And so it really is more a piece of the pie kind of thing, a kind of question and stuff. But what you are describing is very, very true, that like that's our advantage, right? But what I've realized is that it's not a winner take all. It's our advantage for us to win our piece of the pie. And yeah, we can speak very, very directly to our ICP. ICP is actually a little bit older. I would say most of our clients are probably in their 40s, but we are realizing that we need to cater to the younger crowd and all that. An interesting thing is, you've seen with Booking Koala and all that, some of the other softwares are doing a better job of catering to younger, more tech savvy folks. But right now, that's a bunch of cleaning bros on Twitter. And we'd be happy to work with them if they want to, but also they can be quite demanding. I don't mean that in necessarily a bad way. They want the kind of things that I would want if I was seriously running a maid service and wanted to optimize everything. And it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, like you're not really our ICP, right? Like our ICP is specifically non-technical, and it's your nephew is likely going to need to help you, or your grandson is likely going to need to help you get set up on ZenMaid. If that's the case, we're perfect for you. Like we're used to working with people like you. We're used to the hand holding, right? We fully expect you to not be technical. So it's funny when people ask us for, like, give me the details to your open API. And I'm just like, hey, like, 99% of our customers don't know what an API is.
Wow.
So we don't have an API, right? We use Zapier. Zapier has API in its name. That's like part of the reason it's named that, but that's the closest I can give you, and that's not going to change anytime soon because it's just
Yeah,
who we
that's why
serve.
they were named that. But in the whole thing of even somebody who considers themselves as fairly tech savvy or I can figure things out doesn't mean I want to have to. So like the
Yes.
whole like you guys make it so simple that you don't need to, even if you have the capability, you don't need to be. And like even like I've been on calls with people where they like can barely open a Chrome browser, and then I show them around and they're like, well, that's it. It's just so obvious. And like I think that that's totally an ego thing of like, let's make this really like sophisticated software. Not saying it's not sophisticated, but it's so streamlined and like, even what Alex said, I think yesterday in Slack of, how can like remove everything except what would break the UX. And I love that of like that. I feel like you guys do that really well of, like, let's make this as simple as possible because we are like, our industry, like we are out cleaning, we are busy, like just it's a very blue collar kind of work. So if that it makes it more complicated, like our lives already suck, like we're small business owners,
Yeah, yeah. It can be tough and everything, and yeah, our job is to make it so it's just one less thing for you to worry about during the day and stuff. And I think our H1 on the website is like simple scheduling for maid service softwares, and like simple is the biggest thing, right? And so there are times where we get asked for specific features, and people go, "Oh, can't you just put this in and put in a setting?" And it's like, no, we don't want to confuse people with that. And we don't think that you should be doing this. Generally, we try to remain pretty unopinionated and try to allow people to kind of do what they want. But there are times, and it's less about letting people do what they want. It's more about, hey, adding in this option is not going to help enough people to add in complexity for everybody else, right? So we're not going to do that because remaining simple is the challenge now, right? Like even now, I mean, I don't know if you've looked at your ZenMaid sidebar, the side menu anytime soon, but it's like a Frankenstein of different things these days. So that's something on our list is Jim and I need to rethink everything there and reorganize those sections to bring it down. That's something that naturally happens with software companies. You were asking about the legacy competitors and stuff. I definitely came in and thought we were hot shit and had like figured out Twilio and SMS before everyone else, and Jobber makes so much money and they're so silly for not having SMS. And now I've been in the industry for a while, and there's one or two software that have popped up that are trying to build an AI first solution for maid services. And okay, I see what they're going for, but I can already tell that they're going to have that same thing if they're going to look at ZenMaid. It's so old. It's so all these things. We're using AI and doing all this stuff. And the funny thing is like neither kind of perspective is almost wrong. I see where they're coming from, but what they'll realize if they survive as long as we have is that it's just that much easier to do that with something that's brand new. And that when you're starting out, you've got a speedboat. You can change directions, you can speed up, you can accelerate. And ZenMaid's not a battleship. It's more like battleship's too intense, like warfare.
maybe
It's
like a
more like
nice
a
yacht.
cruise. I was going to
Yeah.
say like a cruise ship with Florida retirees. Where it's a little bit more difficult to kind of change what we're doing to change where we're going. But actually the Florida retirees is actually a very good point in that we don't have to change that much about what we're doing to continue winning. So a lot of my stuff, not a lot, but a consideration that I have now is keeping an eye on brand new competition and realizing when they're actually onto something that might make them a competitor in 5 to 10 years. And so for us, that was actually SMS, which seems really silly, but we got SMS in there before anyone else, and people just loved that simple scheduling with basic SMS reminders specific to cleaning companies. And for a lot of people, that was worth $20 a month, and we literally got the business off the ground off like that offer alone. And I'm looking out for the person that comes in and somehow manages to use some sort of chat GPT wrapper to not necessarily compete with us, but to add value in a way that I haven't thought about before. And if I can find that when they do it, then we're probably going to take the Zuckerberg approach and take inspiration from it, make it better, and then roll it out to 3,000 clients, you know? Some people might go, Amar, like, isn't that threatening? It's like, I don't know. If you're a competitor of mine and you're listening to this, like, maybe.
Yeah, just do better. Be better. And it's really interesting because what I think about is, and just even seeing this from like the industry, like people are taking notice, the whole, emphasis from like Cody Sanchez, for example, of like the dirty industries, like that's where the money is, that reoccurring nature. That, there is so much money to be made in this industry and it's not going anywhere, especially when we're talking about like commercial and things like that. I think it's really, I get very frustrated, and I've talked about this before, of people coming into this industry and thinking it can be fully automated, even to the point of scheduling. And even, people letting clients or leads saying, on your booking form, your instant booking form, saying, I want you here at this time. And they just let them book that time. And then you're opening yourself up for disappointing the end user, because you're not going to be actually, like, that time actually doesn't work. And it's not enough time for the services that they suggested and things like that. So it's been interesting, even just the past year. I feel like there's just been this explosion. Maybe it's because of AI, of like people coming into this industry who, as a proud business owner in this industry, I'm like, you have no business being here. You don't know anything about this. And maybe it's just like, I'm like, you don't actually care. You just want to make money, which sounds so stupid, but I don't know if you've like, do you know what I'm trying to say? Of like, you guys don't actually care about providing a good service. You're trying to make quick money and utilizing all this technology as this like face of your business that like, it's actually not going to be good. It's not going to be a good employer. It's not going to be a good service provider. So that really bothers me, but maybe I just need to get over it. Do you think that that's where the industry is going?
So I wouldn't necessarily say that that's where the industry's going, because it was like this 10 years ago. It was like this 12 years ago when I started. I read something online and then was part of a big wave of people that started maid services. And I started a maid service and ran one for 14 months, and I never did a cleaning myself. I don't think that we delivered the best services, but also we had some happy customers who were happy to like pay for it every time. And there were plenty of unhappy customers that fired us and stuff like that. And like in hindsight, I could go back in and do there and do a much better job and deliver a ton better service. But also you could say that everyone that was happily paying us, that we did end up finding and locking down like long term, that was providing a service. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily going that way long term. I think more what it is that you've gotten more popular, and especially more popular with those newer guys, and you hear that a lot more from the newer folks. And I think that until recently, you weren't getting discovered by too many folks that were really, really like early on, that were maybe coming in with all these ideas about how it was going to work. But yeah, it's an interesting one, that what you were just saying, because not, well, I don't know if it's necessarily like calling you out, but I feel like I felt the same way. I feel like I felt the same way even quite recently. And now I definitely feel it's a bit of almost like gatekeeping, right? On our end, right? Where we're making the determination that like this person's not going to succeed, or that like this isn't going to work. And so like when I have people that approach me with similar ideas about SaaS, my approach tends to be, hey, that's totally cool. You can have whatever goals that you want to. If you want to run a completely automated SaaS that like, doesn't have any support and you don't employ anybody else, I can point you to multiple people online that have actually made that happen. And I can, right? I mean, the same thing with like automated maid services. There are some people out there that have done that.
Like he's such a good person. So it's like, it's
Yeah.
weird because I see him, he's this wonderful person who cares. But then
Yeah.
like my stereotype of these people, just for, yeah, my experience, I'm just like, I just want to be like,
Yeah.
just wait. Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have no idea.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that that's essentially what I'm usually trying to say, but maybe in just a positive kind of way. Look, like you can have whatever goals that you want. I can point you to people that have created this thing. All that I'm gonna say, or all that I'm just gonna like tell you, is that first of all, that comes at a cost, and it's almost never their first time doing it. If this is your first time building a business, focus on building a successful business before you focus on automating it, which honestly is probably great advice for everybody. Is like, hey, you want to automate this? Great. You can go into it thinking automation from day one, but let's build a successful business first. Let's focus on like on that. But yeah, essentially for me, it's just like, you know, it comes at a cost. It's going to be more difficult to accomplish. It's possible, but
Mhm.
just be aware of the trade-offs that you're making, right? And there will be trade-offs that you'll be making, and it is more difficult because if it was really easy, then like me and everyone else would already be doing it. So don't act like it's easy to build an automated cleaning business. Like if it like, yeah, you occasionally get people that come to us and, oh, like we just need you to do this thing and all this stuff. And it's just like, so you just want us to like automate your entire scheduling to the point that you literally have to do nothing. What exactly are you doing here, right? It reminds me of Office Space, right? If it's like, what exactly would you say that you do around here? You know?
Movie. That's one of my favorite movies. So I think, that's such a good point. And honestly, yeah, instead of just being like, just you wait, it really is asking questions of how do you plan and anticipate to handle this? How do you plan to deal with when people call out? I know you're going to run all ICs, but what about this? What's the backup plan? And, all of those things. And even talking with Jim and Alex in the past couple of months and showing them the shit show that is scheduling, meaning like how complex, and I think really opening their eyes to scheduling is much less about like proactive, in a perfect world, it's so reactive. Like we have such a reactive industry because cleaners and cancellations. So I think it's been really eye-opening for them to see like this problem is way more complex than I think somebody who's not in the industry would understand. Of how do you deal with this intelligent routing, being as efficient, like getting as much money out of every single day as possible. Like that's not as simple as just let them book at any time. This isn't a hair
Yeah.
salon you walk into. Like we're going
Yeah.
all over the place, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
it's I'm really excited to see like where that goes. I think it'll be, once you guys kind of solve that, it's going to be like, I mean, you can
Yeah.
wipe the floor.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I think we should probably wrap up. We're getting to about an hour. I was going to go back to the poker and expected value topic quickly that you'd asked about earlier, just because I think you were asking about when that developed or the CEO development. And so poker has been a very important part of my like life and just sort of how I think about risks in poker. Expected value is, to just put it, as a quick like poker analogy, is so if you are 100% favorite to win some hand, and then there's some bet that's made, obviously your expected value is 100%. Anything that you put into the pot there, you're going to let in. Whereas if, let's say, as probably going off the rails in terms of like example, but if there's $3,000 that's like being bet on, and someone bets $300, so you have to call $300 to win $3,000, you might think that you're highly unlikely to win the hand. But if you're 20% likely to win the hand, then it makes sense to do it, because if you pay the $300, you do that 10 times, you win enough times to actually make money. And so that is the same framework that I've brought to many of the decisions with ZenMaid, where like the Maid Summit was a perfect example of that. That was a big bet, but it had a massive amount of upside, right? And so I'm generally thinking about like expected value, where the Maid Summit could have been a ton of work and it could have fallen completely flat, but it was if this works, it's going to be massive on a level that it's worth the risk for doing. And so the interesting thing that's changed for me over the years is that in the past, all of my bets were about upside. Everything was cool. We're going to spend $1,000 because it might, on the off chance, it might bring us back $5,000 in revenue. And if it does that, then we can spend $5,000 and et cetera, right? And so for a long time, that's how we've thought about risk and expected value and about taking bets at ZenMaid. And what I've realized is that my primary role as the CEO is to first lead the team and to hire the best team possible. And then it's to manage the cash. And then the last thing is the high level vision to make sure everyone's pulling in the same direction. And so the really interesting thing with expected value now is what we were talking about with the pricing. Now, most of the bets that I'm making with ZenMaid, it's less about the upside and more about lowering the downside risk. It's more about lowering covering the risk of if this goes wrong. And so that ties back into what we were talking about with Jules and the new pricing. That I think arguably we could have gotten the same results with him, but the chances of it going horribly wrong were considerably higher without his help. And that's really what I was paying for. I wasn't paying for him to make us more money. I was paying for him to lower the risk that we completely miss and shit the bed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and where that came from. The final thing I wanted to comment on is just kind of the I have really respected and signed begrudgingly so your guys' focus and the use of the phrase 80/20 in every single meeting ever made in ZenMaid, and then like also blue sky thinking. So it's real like in any meeting that we're at, like we're all just like, not me, because I'm like the biggest blue sky, like squirrely person ever. Of like, what if we did this? But I really like how you guys are always like 80/20, 80/20, 80/20. And like, has it always been that way? And then also, but still having like big ideas and like putting them in this category. So I guess my final question is, how do you make decisions around that, one? And then second kind of part of it, how do you decide on making features that people are asking for versus things that are totally out of left field, i.e. SOS feature? Like that was so like, I mean, that was an industry like groundbreaking thing. You're welcome. And so like, how do you like balance those types of things, you know?
Yeah, for the listeners, we released an SOS feature for cleaners that might be uncomfortable in a client's home or something like that, and that came out of some stories that Stephanie was telling when we were at the team retreat in Zandvoort last year, and her and some of the team members brainstormed that and came together and came out with it. That was one of the coolest things for me as the CEO of ZenMaid. I forget if I told you this, but I hadn't really thought about that feature since I told the team that, yeah, that's cool. That makes sense to work on when we were in Zandvoort. So I received an email from myself announcing a feature that I had never seen in my software. And so I opened up this email and read the thing and I was like, nice job, Amar. This is really good. This is really, really good stuff. Yeah. So that was like quite cool. Yeah, the 80/20 thing has always been a part of the company because it's something that I read from the book, The 4-Hour Work Week, which is essentially my Bible. And that was probably one of the singular concepts that changed my life. For those of you guys that don't know it, it's just that 80% of your outputs come from 20% of your inputs. And that can be applied to all sorts of things in life. The ones that I really like, just as an example that makes sense, is, in case that on the surface doesn't make sense to you, if you think about your wardrobe, chances are you wear the same couple of things over and over again. Even if it's 2 sweatpants, but you own 5 pairs, you probably have 2 favorite ones you wear all the time. That's a perfect 80/20. You probably wear 20% of your wardrobe 80% of the time. And that applies to so many different things. But we think about it in terms of adding value to ZenMaid. So we're always asking ourselves, what is like the blue sky, the absolute perfect solution that we could deliver here if we had all the money in these different things? And then what's the fastest way that we could possibly bring the scope of this down to just fix the problem or to add value? And so a perfect example of that is you've probably seen in ZenMaid, this is one that frustrates some of our users. So if any users are listening, I'm sorry. But if you schedule a one-time clean in ZenMaid, and then you want to make it a recurring clean, that you make a mistake or the person calls back and says, hey, I want a weekly cleaning, you actually can't do that in ZenMaid. That for whatever reason, it's technical debt from 12 years ago. You can't convert a one-time appointment into a recurring service. We used to get tickets about that all the time. I talked to the team and they essentially said, we essentially have to rebuild the scheduling from scratch to fix that issue. We don't think that's worth it, but what else can we do here? The solution that we came up with, I'm quite proud of this because this was me, is we added in a button on one-time appointments that says convert to recurring service. And when people click on that button, there's literally a pop-up that says, you cannot do this. You need to go and take these steps instead. We had a couple people that got offended by that. right? But the whole thing is that if we're not able to actually fix the underlying issue, or we're just not willing to, we're just not willing to. And I'm completely fine with that because I look at my bank account every morning. So I'm completely fine, like, not fixing that issue. People can live with that bug. I know that it's not ideal, but fixing it just doesn't like make any sense there. So the 80-20 solution was to do that. But the whole thing is that with that, we were thinking, okay, the problem here is that we don't do this thing and that everyone is contacting us about it and then having to wait for a reply from us to then go and to resolve their issue unless they figure it out another way, in which case they figure it out, but they don't know if it's right. So we actually redefine the problem. And when you think about it that way, it's like, okay, how do we get them the information that they need faster? It's like, great, they're clicking on the actions menu. They expect to see a button that says convert to recurring because that's what they're looking to do. So we're just going to put that button there. And when they click on it, pops up, explains why. Now they get an answer instantly. They don't have to contact support, so we don't have to deal with the ticket. It's literally better for everybody. Is it the perfect solution? No. Does it remove a massive amount of the headache around the actual problem? Yes, for everybody involved. And so that's like the mindset that we try to take with everything. And I'm definitely going to have Jim on here to talk about our design and to have a conversation about that. But I think Jim got sick of hearing 80-20, and then he really leaned into it. And he's told me at some point that he's like, I've brought this to all my other clients. It's how I think about everything now. And so that's how it ended up in the company. Yeah, I have a lot of mental models like that. That might be for another
Yeah.
like podcast. I can write down like what those are. But I've got a couple of them, and that's like definitely a really, really big one. That's why you hear it referenced so much like in meetings, because I feel like companies like ours have a tendency to not necessarily overcomplicate solutions, but they have a tendency to always jump to what's kind of like the perfect or like the best solution. And the truth is that the best solution, the best solution might not be a complete solution. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's allowed you guys to move very quickly, release like, even like the checklist feature of like, okay, that's a huge win for everybody. Is it the ideal perfect of what Stephanie wants right now in her business? No, but I'm not your ICP. And I think that that's been like a real learning of like, it's Stephanie, like this isn't the Stephanie show. And like, they're asking you for your thoughts because you've done this, but you're not the person they're selling to. So that's been really interesting.
And yeah, one of the things that I've had to let the team know, and that this is one that might not sound the best, out there or whatever, but yeah, it's fine. Is like, you hear a lot of the customer is always right. I think that every business owner knows that is not the slightest bit true, not even remotely close. Like, the customer is wrong so often, it's not even funny. But the customers are always right. And that's something that we've really, really leaned into, right? And that's something that I've had to push back, or I've had to remind the team if it's like, hey, just remember that we're getting input from Stephanie, but Stephanie's not actually the ideal client. The ideal client doesn't need all the things that Stephanie does. And that's kind of the tough thing, is to parse through like that information. Of course, I'm not saying that you're wrong. You're never wrong. But
well,
never wrong, right?
hypothetically, one could say other Stephanies are. And so, no, I think it's great because, even just seeing some of the, I guess, complaints or feedback from especially larger users who are kind of divas. We're divas because we know what we want, and what we want and need is so different than what I wanted and needed when I was at the size of your ICP. Of like, when I started, individual cleaner Stephanie, ZenMaid was perfect. It was perfect.
Yep.
It did everything and more that I could ever want. So it's just like, I think that that's really like amazing that you're able to keep that in perspective and really like stand your ground on that. Because I think if you didn't, the whole thing would collapse, because you'd be just trying to like basically, brown nose and kiss ass of these people who are not your ICP.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, I was gonna like launch into a spiel about how I think about the features and what you were saying of like, how do I think about random features and what people are asking for and saying they need and stuff. We're gonna do a part 2 of this, of this recording. We'll do it like maybe next week or something. I'll watch the end of this episode and we'll jump in like right back there, and that'll probably kick off another like hour of chatting. But if I answer this question, it's just gonna keep going.
Let's keep going.
Because we both have ADHD. So yes, if for any listeners listeners that are still with us, thank you for joining us. Let us know if you have any questions or anything else that you want to hear. I think I'm probably going to share this with the ZenMaid team. I think the ZenMaid team would actually like find this fascinating. So yeah, if you guys have any follow-up questions or anything that you would like to hear from either me or Stephanie, drop it in the comments, the Slack, my Twitter, where Stephanie, thanks for joining. Check her out at Serene Clean.
Yeah, Serene Clean and then Filthy Rich Cleaners, obviously.
Yes, the Filthy Rich Cleaners podcast by ZenMaid and Stephanie Pipkin, which is
You guys
really cool. All right, cool. I'll see you next time.